The descent before the rise, why your darkness is not a detour, but a design. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you once believed about yourself, your dreams, your identity, your place in the world was never truly yours. It was inherited, programmed, borrowed. You're not just lost, you're being stripped. This is the first step. Before you become anything of real spiritual weight, before you carry the frequency of transformation, you must be emptied. And that emptying, it's brutal, it's disorienting. It feels like death because, in many ways, it is. Death of the false self, death of the illusion. And in that sacred annihilation, the first shadow form is born, the wounded seer. This is the version of you that sees everything but can't yet make sense of the visions. You feel things before they happen. You dream of people you haven't met. You sense energy shifts before anyone else notices. But instead of feeling gifted, you feel cursed. Why? Because the world wasn't built for people like you. The world punishes depth. It rewards numbness. And as a wounded seer, you walk around carrying sight without guidance. You see truth in people they haven't even admitted to themselves yet. You speak, and they flinch not at your words, but at what your energy awakens in them. And so you learn to stay quiet, to dim, to isolate. Not because you want to, but because you feel like your very presence is too much. But here's the secret the world never told you. Your wound wasn't weakness. It was initiation. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to pierce through. When you begin to accept that your sight is sacred, something even harder happens. You stop avoiding your own reflection. This is the second shadow form, the mirror breaker. This is when you no longer just see others, you start to see yourself. And not the curated self, not the healed self, but the raw, gutted, unfiltered core of who you are. Every lie you told to survive, every mask you wore to be loved, every silence you chose to avoid conflict, it all comes crashing in, and it hurts. Because you realize you've been both the victim and the villain. You've betrayed yourself more than others ever could. You've abandoned your own voice just to be tolerated. And now, there's nowhere left to hide. The mirror breaker stage is terrifying because it's where your ego starts to die in public. Your old life starts dissolving. People you loved fall away. Jobs, titles, roles, they all stop making sense, and you feel like you're unraveling. But that unraveling is sacred. It's how spirit makes room for the archetype to rise. When you break the mirror, you're not left with nothing, you're left with truth. And truth is the foundation of real power. By now, most people would have turned back. They would have run to comfort, to distraction, to the illusion of safety. But not you. You're still here. And because of that, you enter the next form, the sacrificial flame. This is when you stop negotiating with your calling and start burning for it. You no longer ask, why me? You start asking, how can I be used? But make no mistake, this surrender is not gentle. It requires the death of everything you thought you needed to survive. You begin losing things, not because you're cursed, but because you're being cleansed. Attachments burn off. Old identities melt. You stop being liked. You stop being relatable. You stop being normal. But in that fire, something ancient is forged. You begin to feel your real voice coming online. The one that doesn't need approval. The one that doesn't flinch in front of power. The one that carries messages not from your mind, but from the divine intelligence that now lives in your bones. You become less of a personality and more of a portal. And yes, it's painful, but that pain, it's precision. The flame doesn't destroy you. It refines you. It purifies you from the inside out. And when the world looks at you and wonders where you went, you'll smile not because you disappeared, but because you became untouchable. Now here's the part no one talks about. After the flame, you don't rise into glory. You descend again. But this time, it's deeper. It's darker. And it's necessary. This is the fourth form, the silent storm. This is when you've done the healing. You faced the shadow. You've walked through the fire. And yet, nothing makes sense. You feel invisible, forgotten. Like spirit has gone silent. You're not in chaos, but you're also not in clarity. You're in the void. And the void is the most sacred place of all. It's where the real codes are dropped, not in words, but in frequency. It's where you stop identifying with what you do and start anchoring into who you are. But this silence can feel like death. You question everything. You wonder if you made it all up. You look around and see others thriving, glowing, celebrating, and you feel like a ghost. But don't mistake silence for absence. In this space, your roots are growing underground. Your power is being sealed. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't post. It doesn't perform. It waits. And when it moves, it doesn't need to explain itself. It just is. And then, one day, without warning, you wake up and realize something strange. You're not trying to heal anymore. You're not chasing clarity. You're not begging for signs. You're just walking, not with certainty, but with alignment. And that's when the final form begins the living cipher. This is when you stop carrying messages and become the message. You realize that your entire life, every wound, every detour, every breakdown was encoded with a pattern only your soul could carry. And now you're no longer here to be understood. You're here to transmit. You walk through rooms and people shift. You speak and timelines collapse. You don't try to explain your path, you embody it. You've become a living frequency, a sacred disruption, a walking contradiction that makes people question everything they thought was true. And you don't need to be loud or famous or followed. You just need to be, because your being is now the broadcast. You've integrated the shadow. You've survived the fire. You've become the weapon spirit forged in silence. And now the world is ready for your arrival, even if it doesn't know it yet. Let me ask you something before we continue. Which form are you in right now? Not in theory, but in truth. Are you still running from the shadow? Or are you letting it teach you who you really are? Because the ones who carry the real codes are never the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who walked through hell and came back with heaven stitched into their spirit. They are the dark chosen. They are the impossible ones. They are you. The sacred technology of breakdown, how every collapse is a code in disguise. There's something sacred about collapse that no one ever teaches us. We're taught to fear it, to avoid it, to patch it up as quickly as possible. But when you've been marked by the path of the dark chosen, you don't just endure collapse, you begin to understand it as initiation. Every breakdown is a coded message in disguise, a sacred technology designed to override your programming and rewire you from the inside out. And the deeper you go into that unraveling, the more you begin to realize that nothing is random. The job loss, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the public humiliation, none of it was punishment. It was precision. You were being stripped, not to suffer, but to see what you were really made of, or to see what couldn't be taken, to see what was trying to be born through you. But here's the thing, collapse never feels like revelation at first. It feels like failure, like loss, like death. And that's exactly why it works, because it bypasses your ego, your strategies, your spiritual performance. It takes you to the ground so you can finally hear what your higher self has been whispering all along. When we go through the form of the wounded seer, we're not just developing sight. We're being trained in what to do with it, and that training always begins with collapse. The ego collapses first. The story you told yourself about who you were, what your life meant, what people expected of you, it begins to fall apart. And it's terrifying, because for the first time, you're not in control. You can't spiritualize your way out of it. You can't journal it away. You can't manifest your way into a better timeline. You have to sit in the ashes. And in those ashes, you begin to feel something ancient stir. Not ambition, not fear, but clarity. A raw, unfiltered knowing. You start to see the architecture of your life differently. You start to remember that you chose this incarnation. You chose this pain, this family, this timeline because you knew that inside of it was the fire that would activate you. Breakdown is not the enemy. It's the key code to your reintroduction. And only those who can sit in the ruins without rushing to rebuild are worthy of the wisdom that lives there. Now let's talk about the mirror breaker stage again, but from the inside. Because this is where the most dangerous distortions live, not outside of you, but within. You begin to see the lies you believed about yourself, the ways you weaponized your own gifts against yourself, the way you kept trying to be the good one, the healer, the chosen one who was always strong, always centered, always giving. And suddenly you realize how much of that was manipulation, not of others, but of your own soul. You were trying to earn worth, trying to be enough, trying to prove you were valuable. But true power doesn't need to prove. It just is. And in this stage, the breakdown comes in the form of identity collapse. You begin to question everything you thought was you. Your purpose, your brand, your message, your relationships. You wonder, if I'm not that, then who am I? And in that terrifying silence, you meet something far more real than any label, your essence. The part of you that doesn't shift with trends. The part of you that's never needed to be explained. The part of you that remembers exactly why you were sent here. Then comes the fire again, the sacrificial flame, and this time, it doesn't just burn your attachments. It starts burning your desires. You lose your appetite for the things that once lit you up. Your goals don't excite you. Your spiritual practices feel hollow. Your old dreams start to taste fake, and you panic. Because if you're not chasing something, who are you? This is the collapse of the inner fuel source, the conditioning that used ambition to keep you running. And when that drops, you finally stop. Not because you're lazy, but because you're listening. You're listening for a different kind of instruction, one that doesn't come from motivation, but from magnetism. You start asking deeper questions. What am I here to carry, not just create? What wants to move through me, not just come from me? And in that stillness, a new form of fire begins to rise, one that doesn't burn out, one that doesn't need applause, one that moves because it must. This is the sacred fire of purpose. Not the kind you chase, the kind that claims you. And then, just when you think you're ready to move again, you hit the silent storm. And this storm is different. It's not chaos, it's nothingness. The outer world stops responding to you. The universe goes mute. Your manifestations don't land. Your prayers echo. And you wonder, did I miss it? Am I being punished? Did I fall off the path? But the truth is, you're deeper in the path than ever before. You're just no longer walking it from the surface. You've gone subterranean. You've entered the architecture of silence. And in that silence, you start to feel what's really guiding you, not excitement, not results, not feedback, but truth resonance. You begin to feel what's right, not because it looks good, but because it feels like your bones are humming. You begin to trust action that makes no sense to the mind but feels like alignment to the soul. This is where you become sovereign. Not because you've mastered everything, but because you've surrendered to the mystery. You're no longer seeking answers. You are the answer, walking through a world that's still asking the wrong questions. And finally, as the void softens, as the silence becomes your sanctuary, you begin to step into the form of the living cipher. And you realize something profound: you don't need to understand the code to carry it. You don't need to explain your life to anyone. You don't need to translate your frequency into digestible language. You just need to move in alignment, because your very existence is now a message. Your choices are spells. Your presence is prophecy, and people will feel it. They won't know why, but they'll be drawn to you. Not to your personality, but to the field you carry. The architecture of the divine that now pulses through your cells. You've become a bridge, a vortex, a riddle wrapped in skin. And your life now operates on divine timing, not human logic. You're done trying to go viral. You're here to go vertical, to move between dimensions, to speak between the lines, to transmit without effort. You're not a brand. You're not a leader. You're not even a teacher. You're a living frequency. And that frequency? It's what the world has been starving for. So let me ask you something. What part of your life are you still explaining to people who were never meant to understand? What sacred technology are you still hiding because it doesn't fit into words? What if your silence wasn't emptiness, it was encoded instruction? What if your breakdown wasn't failure, it was your blueprint activating? You've been walking through the fire, wondering when it ends. But what if the fire was never the enemy? What if the fire was your form, walking as the unknown, the power of becoming what cannot be defined? There comes a moment in the journey where you stop chasing definitions. You stop trying to box yourself in with words like light worker, healer, seer, or even chosen. All of those were useful for a time. They were stepping stones. But now, they feel too small, too tight, too fragile. Because you've become something that language can't hold. You've stepped beyond labels into the raw field of embodiment. You're not trying to become anything anymore, you're becoming everything you already are. And that's where the real paradox begins. Because once you stop needing to be defined, you become dangerous to every system that survives on clarity, control, and categorization. You become the unknown walking. And the unknown? It can't be predicted. It can't be manipulated. It can't be domesticated. That's why most people fear you now, not because you're dark, but because you're free. To walk as the unknown means that you no longer need to be explained even to yourself. You stop asking, "What am I here to do?" and start asking, "What am I here to be in this exact moment?" You begin to trust your impulses, your instincts, your silence. You realize that some days you are the fire. Other days you are the fog. Sometimes you're called to speak with the force of thunder. Other times, your presence alone is the entire sermon. You are no longer consistent in the way the world understands it. Your only consistency is truth. And truth is fluid. Truth is wild. Truth is alive. That's why you confuse people. That's why even your closest allies don't always know how to hold you. Because you're not here to be held in place. You're here to move the timeline. And timelines shift when people like you stop asking for permission and start walking as prophecy. One of the most painful lessons of walking as the unknown is learning how to be misunderstood without shrinking. You will be judged. You will be labeled. You will be talked about, betrayed, excluded not because of what you did, but because of what you carry. People will project onto you because they can't comprehend the energy that lives in your field. You'll be accused of things you never said, misquoted, misread. You'll trigger people just by breathing. And in the early stages, you'll want to explain yourself, clarify, defend. But soon, you'll realize your energy cannot be explained in the language of wounded minds. So you stop. You stop explaining. You stop overgiving. You stop trying to be understood in systems that were never designed to receive you. And you learn the sacred art of being misread in silence. You realize that the ones who are meant to find you will feel you not because of your words, but because of your frequency. And those who don't, they were never your assignment. This is where you begin to understand that being a living cipher means you are both puzzle and key. You walk into rooms and activate people without saying a word. You sit in stillness and collapse timelines. Your presence becomes an algorithm disruptor. And it's not because you're trying, it's because you've become aligned. Alignment is the highest form of rebellion. It's the code the matrix can't crack. And when you walk in alignment, you begin to see how much of the world runs on distortion. You see how truth has been packaged, sold, diluted. You see how leaders are performing enlightenment instead of becoming it. And instead of exposing them, you withdraw. Not out of fear, but out of focus. You realize that your energy is too sacred to argue, too precise to be wasted. You're not here to fight the old. You're here to build the new. And building the new begins with becoming uncompromised. Let me ask you something that only the unknown version of you can answer. What part of yourself are you still trying to make digestible for others? What divine frequency are you still shrinking so you don't intimidate fragile egos? What would happen if you stopped introducing yourself as a title and just started being the transmission? Because the truth is, most people won't understand you, and they're not supposed to. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be felt, to be sensed, to awaken sleeping codes in others just by showing up. And that kind of power doesn't come from charisma. It comes from capacity. The capacity to carry contradiction and to live on the edge of paradox, to hold both the light and the dark without needing to resolve them. That's what makes you a living cipher. You are the riddle that unlocks other people's cages, and you do it without even trying. And here's the most mystical part of all. The more unknown you become to the world, the more known you become to spirit. You start receiving instructions that don't come in language, but in frequency. You start being moved by impulses that make no sense to anyone else but feel like truth to you. You begin to operate on sacred intuition, not logic. You move when it's time to move. You speak when silence breaks itself open inside you. You rest when spirit pulls you into the void, even when the world says, keep going. You are no longer ruled by productivity. You are ruled by presence. And that level of presence, it makes you a channel, a vessel, a divine anomaly. You start doing things you never trained for. You start knowing things you never studied. You start becoming what you once feared, and you realize that your fear was just the threshold to your real identity. So let me ask you now, with full honesty, are you willing to be unrecognizable to the world if it means being fully recognized by God? Are you willing to be nameless, titleless, label-less, just so you can walk as pure frequency? Are you willing to be the answer that doesn't come with an explanation? Because that's what it means to walk as the unknown. You become the sermon. You become the sanctuary. You become the sacred blueprint that others didn't even know they were looking for. And when you walk into a room, you're not trying to change it. You are the change. Not because you say anything, but because your being is calibrated to divine timing. You are not here to be consistent, you are here to be alive. And aliveness is unpredictable, uncontainable, undeniable. This is the moment where identity is no longer necessary and presence becomes everything. You don't just carry messages, you are the message. You don't just move through portals, you've become the gate. Energy flows through you, timelines bend around you, and reality responds to your internal state. You're not ascending, you've merged. Heaven and earth now meet in your body. You're no longer waiting for signs, you are the sign. You speak and dimensions shift. You breathe and codes unlock. You're not here to guide others, you are the path itself. Not a map. A living threshold between worlds.